Going up. This is good.
Such small groups.
I know. Well, it's a good start. My first speaking engagement. Then we'll get to it.
You'll see most people kind of moving from.
This is the GP track, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, feel free to ask questions. Keep it interactive. Got a few more minutes to go still. So get started. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. Get a good break in there and see some product, I guess, product sessions were for previously to the session. Yeah. It's good. It's good. A little laser pointer on the mouse, so we'll see if that helps us navigate through some things. So yeah, I'll probably just give it another minute and we can get started. Good. All right, so it's 11:15, so I guess we can get started, and I'm sure some stragglers might come in and go. We'll see what happens. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to come listen to my session on leveraging workflow throughout GP. So today what we're going to see is some actual customer data. The customer I've been working with is in the mining industry, and they use this for their procurement mostly. So I'll talk about the workflow in general, and then I'll get into some specific examples around requisitions, vendors, purchasing and purchase orders, and sort of how they use the module to streamline their operations between head office and their mine site. So before we get started, how many people in the room actually use the GP workflows? Good portion. Okay. Well, for the rest of you who aren't, this is a good learning opportunity. Maybe this is something that you can implement in your organization and kind of move forward with it. And those who use it, maybe there's some tips or tricks or something that might be beneficial to you.
Are you for the workflow 2.0?
Yeah, the latest workflow in GP 18.6. Yeah. All right, so my name is Brian Hack. I'm the principal and founder of the BHC Group. I reside in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and travel back and forth to Vancouver from where I'm from. 2002, I started my GP career, so 22 years now working with the product. I started worked for 2 Microsoft partners in Vancouver for 10 years, traveling around Western Canada, mostly implementing GP. And then after 10 years, decided it was time to do something different. And instead of implementing and selling the software, ended up going to a startup management consulting firm, helping companies select and implement ERP systems, but from the customer's perspective. So bringing in my knowledge as an implementation consultant to the customer side was a really good benefit to my new clients because I understood the ERP lifecycle. I knew how the implementations worked and could kind of guide them through the pitfalls of implementation. So I did that for 4 years, while at the same time still carrying out a few GP customer support It's nice when you build a good relationship with a customer. If you move from partner A to partner B to partner C to your own thing, they like to follow you. So I was fortunate to have a handful of customers that followed me throughout my career, and some that I still support today from almost 20 years ago. And in 2016, I decided it was time to venture out on my own. I had, like I said, a handful of customers and a small team that decided to come with me. And I started my own consulting company. So mostly focusing on Dynamics GP. So leveraging the products and technology you own. And then if we can't leverage it any further, then we can help with the software selection. So sort of marrying the two worlds of my GP implementation versus software selection and implementation management of ERP systems. In 2023, I attended my first Dynamics Con Live conference in Scottsdale, and that was just an eye-opener for me and really wanted me to jump all in and get involved in the community. So I applied to be a speaker and even got involved in the Dynamics mentorship committee. So if anyone's interested in being a mentor or a mentee throughout the Dynamics community, we're taking applications now, and we're going to talk more about it at lunch, and we have a few breakout sessions. We're going to try and reach out to people. So if you're interested, let me know. Definitely happy to have a conversation. Okay, and then my goal was to present at this conference. So there you go. Thanks to Bob and others who kind of encouraged me along the way to put in my bid, and here I am. So today from the agenda side, so we're going to talk about some prerequisite setups that are required to use the workflow. Then I'll go into the workflow maintenance and kind of show you what the setups are all about and what options you have and how to connect. Then just a brief set the stage of 2 examples that I'll walk through that my customer currently uses. Then we'll do some tips and tricks. In the tips and tricks, I have a few other areas that you might think, well, maybe not exactly related to workflow, but at the end of the day, they all trigger into the PO workflow automatically and might be useful. And then questions. And feel free to answer or ask any questions as we're going throughout the presentation. I've got some time built in for that. And then just, yeah, follow up contact information if you would like. Okay, so on the prerequisite side, so the first thing that you'd want to look at doing is to the workflow setup window. So in GP under the system administration, there's a workflow setup function. And in there, there's 2 real options that switches that you get to pick, and then fill out the information. So see, there's a little highlighter. Great. So the first one is enabling email for workflow. And then the second one is enable email actions. And so I'll explain the 2 in a minute. So if you want to leverage the email functionality within Microsoft and Great Plains, you'll want to enable this one. Okay, so you'll talk to your IT department. They'll have to provide some information with a login and password for the SMTP information. And then they've got their authentication. So I'm not the technical guy, but I talk to IT and they'll get this information for you. And then when it comes down to the enable email actions, so this uses GP Web Services. So again, this needs to be set up and configured prior to coming into this window. You'll need the server name and port that has to be open on the firewall in order to connect. And what this function allows you to do is when you get that email saying, I want to approve or reject, this email essentially gives you the hyperlinks to take you to the web service landing page where you can then approve or reject a workflow. What else did I have in here? Yeah, that's good. Okay. So the next one is the document attachment. So not necessarily a final or must-have prerequisite, but I like to put it in here. And so what this allows you to do, especially in this bottom one here where it says send attachments and email, when you're populating, whether it's a vendor configuration or a purchase order or a requisition, you can go in using the document attachment function in GP, and any documents that get attached into the record, when this is connected and configured properly, will show in the email. So it really streamlines the process if you're going to tender or you need 3 quotes and you're doing a requisition, or if you're setting up a new vendor and you need a vendor credit check or something like that. You can attach all those documents in GP, which is good to have from an audit perspective. But also when you get that email to the approver, they can see that information there as well. So typically here we'd allow document attachments. We'll set a default location. So this is not where the files are actually stored. It's sort of a temporary folder. The documents themselves are stored in the GP database as a blob type. It's a specific type of file. And you get over here, we can set the maximum file size. So if you're setting up attachments, again, talk to IT. They may have limits on how big an email attachment could be. This one just happened to be really large at 999 megs, but typically this could be 10 megs, 15 megs, something that's more reasonable. That's not going to eat up your email size. And then down here, you've got options essentially for passwording things and allowing which document attachments to flow through to the email. So whether it's on the item customer, the item maintenance window, the item vendor maintenance window, and then I guess PT for employee if you have employee expenses. But the key thing here would be allow document attachments, set a default location, allow some flows, and then yeah, send attachments in email. Company email setup. So the primary one in here that you're going to focus on is this desktop client property, which is essentially the modern authentication that has to be configured in Azure. So I guess the prerequisite to the prerequisite is talk to IT again. They'll need to go into Azure, set up an app ID for modern authentication. And once they've done that, then they can come in or they can email or Teams message you the app ID. And then once you put that in here, that's what's going to drive the email workflow. If you have the web client for GP, then there's a different app ID that you need to have configured as well. But for other stuff in here, you can identify which documents that will go through that. Typically, the setup here is for emailing vendor remittances or sales orders or invoices or purchase orders using the GP module direct. And then in here, we've got the enable email. So these options here takes you to the setup window to write out or modify the existing templates for the body of the email that actually goes to the approver in this case, and what they want to see. And what you'll also notice is once you put in this app ID for the first time and say okay or save, it's going to log in or prompt you to log in through the Microsoft authentication window. So you'll put in your username, password, and then typically multi-factor authentication is configured. So if you have the Authenticator app on your phone, it may prompt you to put in that number, or it may, say, send me a text with a code or a phone call. Just depends on what's configured on Azure for the authentication.
You could get like 18.3 or 18.4 for this.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, the modern authentication, yes. I think it was 18.3 that required that move. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the next one. So workflow calendar setup. This is another one that might get often overlooked when setting up the workflow. So kind of to break it down for you, when you're configuring your workflow maintenance, every type of step you can say in there, there's a time limit. And I'll show you what that looks like later. But essentially in there's a checkbox that says follow or allow to use the workflow calendar. So as an example, my work day is Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Okay, so let's say it's 4 o'clock on a Friday and I submit a request for a purchase order approval and I'm using the calendar. That due date or expiration for the approver for the 8 hours isn't going to be till 3 o'clock on Monday, because it's saying from 4 to 5 is 1 hour and then start again at 8 a.m. on Monday, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, plus the 1 hour. So it kind of takes you that 8-hour block. If you don't use that and you choose to ignore it as a checkbox, then that's going to be due by 12 a.m. Saturday. So again, talk to your approvers and you figure out what's the best way to set the time limits. Okay. And if they set a time limit for 12 a.m. and then they don't respond because it's the middle of the night, then every so often there's another setting for the reminder email to go out. And that follows the same process. So they could be getting a 4 a.m., an 8 a.m., a 12 p.m. reminder email saying, hey, you got to approve, you got to approve, you got to approve. So yeah, this is kind of a nice one to have that's working. Any questions so far in some of those prerequisites? No? Okay. I don't want to rush it, so I want to take my time and make sure people have ample opportunity to ask questions. So what we'll look at now is the workflow maintenance. So this is all the configuration of the actual module for workflow. So the things that we're going to look at today, I'm going to spend most of my time in the purchasing series, as I mentioned earlier, but I'll show up there the financials, the sales, the payroll, and the administration modules or windows. Those are the different types of workflows you can set up if you so choose to. And in the purchasing series, we're going to look specifically at vendors, purchase requisitions, and purchase orders. Okay. So here's a vendor approval example. So each workflow type, whether it's vendor approval or the transaction approval or invoicing or batch, you need to have a manager in here. So it's sort of a requirement to have at least one manager. This manager that comes into the system can either be someone that can override any of the approvals. And again, the system's tracked through that audit log. So if someone approves it when they shouldn't, someone can go back and look and say, hey, why was this approved? I didn't approve it. Maybe the administrator or the manager had to push it through due to timeliness or something like that. And also when you're configuring the workflow condition, you can say, I want to route this particular document to the system's manager. So it would go to that particular person. I haven't used that one. I've only used it once, but for the most part, I just assign specific people to the approvals. But that's where that can come into play as well. And then so down here, we can see I've got my first workflow. It's called AP vendor approval. And notice there's that green check mark. So that means it's active. Okay, so if I create a new vendor or I edit a vendor, that's going to trigger a workflow. It won't just automatically approve. Okay. And then inside of this workflow, I have what are called steps. So I'll just have one step in there called vendor approval again, and we'll kind of get into what that looks like. So under that workflow name, like I said, I called it vendor approval. I marked it active. And then these are the steps, and you can have as many steps as you'd like in this process, but I've kept it pretty straightforward and simple where it always runs and it goes to the Great Plains administrator. So that way I know no one can create a vendor without me as the administrator looking at it. But this could be assistant controller, a controller, someone in finance that manages the vendor list, or even the buyer. If you're heavy on the procurement side, there could be a buyer that's responsible. Okay, so we have several different options. Send notifications for completed actions, and I'll kind of go into that in a minute. Allow approvers to delegate tasks. So again, if I'm the approver and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this should be there, I could delegate it to somebody else through the workflow, and then that gets captured. The other options are allow originator to be an approver. So if I'm the buyer, but do I want the buyer approving their own vendor creation? Okay, so yes or no. In this case, I've said yes, because I'm doing a lot of testing. So in this case, if I create a vendor, I can self-approve it. Always require at least one approver. So this is an interesting one, because if you're not using an always required condition and you're saying, well, if the purchase order is greater than $100, then it's automatically approved. But there's also some cases where the logic that you build into the condition may not hold up. And in that case, if you said, go to the buyer if the purchase order is going to say the inventory department or procurement department, but it's only one condition. If I put it to operations, well, the system's going to self-approve because there's no condition to route it to somebody for approval. So that can be a tricky one to always require at least one approver, something that you want to talk about up front if you allow the system to self-approve or not. And we've had that happen a few times when that's turned off. Like, why is it automatically approving? And because the condition didn't meet the specific scenario. Use alternate final approver. So if someone's not sort of taking the right steps in a timely manner, you can use an alternate approver. And then omit action, needed workflow message from workflow history. That's okay. So when we look at that, I'll show you the workflow history form on how you can navigate through. And then when a task is overdue, what do you want the system to do? Do nothing, escalate it to the next approver, or escalate it to a specific person, or automatically reject it. In this case, because of timeliness, we just escalate it to the next person up and we just let it sit there. Okay. So as I mentioned on this slide here, if I were to click on that little blue icon, it's going to take me to that detail maintenance window. So this is really neat because if I'm the originator and I'm submitting this to someone to approve it, I want to know when an action is taking place. So I can tell the system to notify me as the originator when I hit submit, when I resubmit, when it's approved, when the task is completed, it's rejected, delegated, recalled, escalated, edited, or final approval. some key ones that we like to make sure are marked are the final approval and the reject. Because in that case, once, let's say there's 3 approvers it has to go through, I don't want to get an email every time saying it's approved by 1, approved by 2, approved by 3. I just want to know it's fully approved so then I can go and action that particular transaction. And then if they reject it, I want to know why they rejected it. And so they can hopefully leave a comment in the comment box and I'll get an email with that. And again, I'll show you examples of what those look like. Okay, so now going into the step. So that was the workflow itself. Now we go into the step. So this is where I define the condition. So in this case, I've said the condition is action is always required for the step. Okay, so I'm not putting in any complex conditions or if then else's. It's just you hit submit, it always goes here. So I've assigned it to the Great Plains administrator. They have 48 hours to approve it. I'm applying the workflow calendar. So remember I spoke about that in the beginning. So I've got that, and I'm telling it to send a reminder every 4 hours. And then I get to send a message, which follows this message template and include document attachments. So that I want to turn on. Excuse me. And so on the completion policy, I could have multiple approvers, I should say, in here. And so in the policy, you can only need one respond. The majority must respond, all must respond, or if you have a specific number of approvers that must respond. So you can create 2, 3, 4, and so on. Yeah.
48 hours. So your schedule, you had, let's say 8-hour days.
Yes.
Is that 6 physical days or is that 48 actual hours?
That would be 6 physical days.
Okay.
Yeah. A bit long for an approval on a vendor, but examples. Yeah.
If it was 2 days or.
No, fair enough. Yeah. So because I've got the calendar in, it looks to the calendar as Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. It's going to take 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours until it gets to the end of that time frame. And what's nice too is when you hit submit in GP, you'll actually see that it's pending approval by and due as the timestamp. So you can kind of get an idea of when it's actually coming up. Yeah, thank you. So in here, if I'm going to click on the send message blue hyperlink, again, if you have the permissions to do that, what this will do is zoom in here. Let's see if that works. There we go. Kind of playing around with the zoom thing here because it's a bit small. But yeah, I can go into the default message ID and make edits to it. So really, it's a combination of hard-coded text and fields that you can pull that will be dynamic depending on what data is coming out of the system. You can also create your own from scratch if you like. But I'd recommend just taking the standard, and then if you need to tweak it a little bit, by all means, go ahead and do that. So on the requisition side, similarly here, we've got one that goes straight to the buyer. So we've got, let's go into the next one here. So in this case, the workflow says, go to the buyer. It's always going to the buyer, who is Laura. And we followed all those popular options. In this case, there's no action taken if she misses it. She's pretty much the main person to approve the requisitions, to gather all the information, put in the vendor information, and then convert the requisition to a purchase order. And then as the one step here, action is always required, goes to Laura. In this case, she has 8 hours to approve it, follows the workflow calendar, and then she gets an email every 4 hours. So what we did in this case for requisitions is we used the GP web client. Has anybody used the GP web client before? Yeah, so it's a nice way to have, you know, light users connect to GP and submit requisitions. So we purchased 20 limited or self-service user licenses. I think that's like $175 or something a user, so it's quite economical. So get rid of paper, give them a requisition only or self-service license. They can go into the web client, enter their basic rec information. They don't need to know the vendors. They don't need to know the costs. They just need to know I need to buy these particular items. And then that goes to the buyer, who can then source that or check, hey, we actually have that in inventory. I'll cancel your rec and do an inventory issuance to that person. And then I'll replenish inventory later as the buyer. So putting in the requisition approvals was just a nice way to get rid of pieces of paper, emails, and get the user sort of using the system, and it just goes to one person to manage it. Okay, so now under the purchase orders. Okay, so in here you can see I've got version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So anytime I've been asked by the client to make a material change to the workflow, I would do the copy feature, which I'll talk about later, that essentially copies, I can call it V1, V2, and then I go in and make my edits. So that way, if they come back and say, hey, something's not working, or can you revert back to the previous workflow? If you just modify that existing one, it kind of, you got to redo it or figure out what it was before. And because you can inactivate and activate workflows, just very simply, I could inactivate the V8 and activate the V9. If something didn't work out as planned, I can inactivate V9, go back to V8, copy it to V10, make all the edits, do testing, and then once that's good, activate V10. So you've got some options in that. Okay, so now jumping into sort of that, the workflow and the steps. So the workflow is called the version 9. The steps are going to be sort of broken out here, and I'll show you 2 slides. So when you go into the window, this is typically the left-hand side, and you get to see the indented view of how the data sort of gets nested. And so the system for workflow approval, it kind of goes linear, goes downstream. So the system's always going to say, is this always required? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Then it goes to the next level. Does this meet the criteria? Yes or no? No. It goes to the next level. Does it meet this criteria? So it kind of goes through. And I've built many maps or workflows where they've been more linear and they've been more summarized. But at the end of the day, I usually find there's some sort of issue that goes on, whether the CFO is approving it before a department manager or something, or if they escalate because of the timeout, then it jumps to somebody else and then it's got to go back. I found this was, a little bit extra steps, but it keeps it clean and it makes it simple. And especially if people change roles, then I just have to quickly change who it's assigned to versus recreating something again. And I'll talk about what these levels are and so on in a minute. So what we used in this case was the buyers table for the departments. Okay, so they have 1 buyer, maybe 2 buyers, but for the majority of the time, they decided, hey, in the purchase order window, there wasn't a field for a department in the header. So every requisition or purchase order was specific to a department. We could have linked it at the GL account to the department segment, which I've done in the past too, that can work. But for these guys, it was just much simpler to say, okay, these are all their different operations from geology, inventory, maintenance, mining, safety. So let's put that on the buyer table and we'll route all our conditions based on that. So we cheated it, but that works for them. And it's easy to maintain. It's consistent. No one's having to type something in and spelling it wrong and then breaking the workflow as well. So on the right-hand side, so before I showed you the indented view, on the right-hand side of the workflow step, this was the condition editor. So let's see if I can zoom in here again. For some reason, it doesn't want to go into the black. There we go. Okay. So in here, we've said always required. So the condition is always run and it goes to the director or goes to the site manager just to make sure that we're purchasing what we need. Level 1, the condition says anytime where it's inventory goes to the buyer. And then if it's maintenance, it goes to the buyer. Mill operations, it goes to the buyer. So we've sort of got it of who, oh, actually, that's not true. Let me rephrase. I'm going to zoom out because I'm too close. Okay. So when it's inventory, it goes to a particular person. With inventory, because there's a larger dollar value threshold, we've skipped level 2 and gone straight to level 3. That gives this site manager up to $50,000 of approval. So that's why we've skipped level 2. But if I go to maintenance or mill operations, mining, they've got a limit of up to 2,000. So every time I've gone in, the condition is, maintenance. And the condition is maintenance and greater than 2,000, maintenance and greater than 50,000. So that's what triggers the next step in the approval. Okay, and so we build that out. So it could get a little tricky to see it here, but the nested view on the left-hand side of that screen I showed earlier makes it a bit more visual of how it all rolls up to each other. Okay, so for I guess I got the details here. So for the first level 1, where it's maintenance, where the buyer goes maintenance, it's always required. When I go to level 2, where it's maintenance and it's greater than and includes $2,000, it goes to somebody else. And in here, it follows that first step of level 1 maintenance. So that's how I get it to nest underneath versus saying this is always a first step. And then level 3, maintenance, and the subtotal is greater than 50,000 and it's nested under level 2's maintenance. So hopefully that kind of gives you a visualization of how that could work. So yeah, in here, the buyer is the first level of maintenance. Then if it's over 2,000, it goes to the department managers. So there's 2 in there. So only one of them needs to approve it. And then if it's over 50,000, it goes to the CFO. And it has to go in that order. So the CFO won't see it until the department managers have approved it. And that's why I nested it when we try to do it slightly differently and keep that as a first step and just say, regardless of the departments, if it's over 50 grand, go to the CFO. But it did cause some out of sync issues down the road. Yeah, question.
What version is this?
This is 18.6, the latest one. Okay, yeah, you should. So if you go into the condition editor, oh, that would still be there, the buyer ID field. So when you go into the condition editor, click the drop down. Yeah, I would say purchase order buyer ID. But like I said, we use the department terminology. But if you had a person in there as the actual buyer, it might be there. I think I have a screen. I don't know if I have the drop down of it, but I'll take a look there. Okay. So yeah, in here, that was that workflow condition editor. So you would click on this drop down field. I don't have it in here, unfortunately, but you would scroll down that list and you would see the buyer should be in there. Buyer, subtotal, ship to address, there's all sorts of fields. And if you mark display extended field list, you'd get a few extra fields as well that you can route off of. And I think one of them is even like the GL distribution account or something like that as well. And you can use the and or an or clause. And so you can build it out. And like I said, if it starts getting a bit more complicated, if you say the system must always allow an approver, it's going to block it if that condition is not met. So it can something to think about. Okay, financial series workflow. So just kind of highlighting on it. So in this case, you can do the workflow on the accounts, GL accounts creation, and on the GL batch approval. So this one might be good if you've got, a team of 3 or 4 accountants creating GL accounts, but want the controller or the, assistant controller who is ever in control of GL accounts to just double check it before it gets accepted. And I think too, what you can do for the accounts or vendors or any of the other master records, you can submit it for request and then you can it'll be in the list and you can create a journal entry with the account. You just can't post it. If you tried to post it, it would give you an error saying that account hasn't been approved for posting yet. So it doesn't slow down the process. It doesn't stop it. It just slows it down, but keeps it going forward. And yeah, it's often better to do it that way versus saying, oh, I created it incorrectly. Then someone has to go and correct it and then inactivate the old account. Because if you post it against the account, you can't delete it without deleting history. And then with these guys, because they're a public company too, I often get asked at the end of the year by the internal auditors, well, what were the new GL accounts created? What were the new vendors created or inactivated? So it's good to just run the report and then I get it versus trying to figure out in the email, oh, someone sent me a request to do this. Sales series workshops or workflow. So receivables, batches, and sales transaction approval. I don't know why, but the customer is not there. Even in the latest and greatest version, they don't have the customer approval on. And then for payroll, again, I'm up in Canada, so we don't typically use the US payroll, but there's some options there if you do use that. And then administration. And so again, this is good from an internal control perspective. If you're creating new users or editing security or creating new roles, this is really good to have from that control purpose. To say, yep, I'm going to create a new role. I'm going to edit a role. So that way no one can alternate something if they know how and kind of adjust their permissions without telling anybody. And again, yeah, many times I get asked, what were the new approvers? What was the security changes? Because the auditors are looking for a change in security. And then if there's a change, why was there a change? Who requested the change? This really streamlined that whole process. Okay, any questions so far on that side? Chris?
What does it give the email address from?
Yeah, so it uses, yeah, good point. So it uses the Active Directory emails for the users that are in the workflow. So it doesn't actually require those approvers to be a GP user. If they are, they can go into GP and approve it, and we'll kind of see that next. But through the automation of the emails, yeah, they don't need to be a GP user. It'll use the Active Directory user account. Does that answer your question? How does it know which GP Active Directory? Based on your sign in to the server or onto your computer.
Okay.
So once you connect in, it knows your logon username and it routes off of that.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that question. You
Yeah.
were saying that the approver doesn't have to be a GP user,
correct. Yes.
so they can approve it through the email.
Yes. So that uses the web services part of the system or of that. So yeah, we'll show that. And when you click on the link, it'll take you to a website that says approve or reject, and you put in your comment and hit approve or reject. And then the web services kicks off to write back to GP that document was approved or rejected. And it sends an email to the originator if you marked it to say, hey, I've rejected or approved it. Yeah, so it's really beneficial now to get your entire organization involved without having to buy or create new GP users. Sure. Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so just to set the stage here quickly. So yeah, I'm going to do the vendor approval and purchase order, some screenshots in here. So for the vendor, if we go into it, so this is a typical GP window for vendor creation. So I've gone in, created a new vendor for the BHC group for myself. You can kind of see over here, it says the vendor is not submitted. But if I click on this workflow button, I can hit the submit icon from here and it's going to trigger off. I've got a couple extra products loaded and some debugging features, but typically this would just be its own little button as a big button in there. But yeah, mine's hidden into the next layer. Yes.
Is that an alternate window, or is that once you enable workflow, you get the workflow button?
Once you enable workflow, you get the workflow button. Yeah, good question. Okay, so I also have the option to attach documents on that creation. So if you click on this one, again, you may have the attached paperclip. Again, my resolution and products installed have sort of condensed it a little bit, but you would get that paperclip icon. You click on that, that takes you to the document attachment window. From there, you can drag and drop in your file. And now that's attached to this document. When I hit submit and I've marked to allow attachments to go through the email, then the approver is going to see that attachment in the email. So I've got the save button, so you can always start your document, hit save, come back later, but it's going to be in that unsubmitted state or unapproved state as well until you hit submit. So the user has to remember to hit the submit button. So once you do that, this window pops up for the workflow action. In here, the originator can write any commentary. Anything in here would be beneficial to the approver. So, you know, we need to buy from this person because the other supplier doesn't carry this part. Or I've got 3 quotes and this is the best one, but we don't have them set up. So can you please create the vendor? So more information, the better, and that's going to flow into the email. When you're done that, you hit the submit button. And then when you come back into it, this is where you can see in here that it says pending final approval by the Great Plains Administrator, and it's due at 11 a.m. on the 20th. Again, like screenshots may not correspond exactly, so if you're trying to do the math, it may not align, but yeah, the nice thing is at least the person can come in and see when is it due. Okay, so as the approver, I'm going to come in this case and just approve it in GP. So as an approver, I would come in, I would hit workflow and then workflow again, and then I've got my 3 options for approve, reject, or delegate. And the delegate one is an option in the workflow step itself to allow a delegation. If I didn't allow the delegation, that would disappear. Yes.
Can you see the documents that were attached from here?
No, from here as well. So in here, I would click on this drop down, go to attach, and yes, you could click on that, and then you would see all the documents attached. Yes.
Would the person who is approving it by the web services also have the ability to delegate?
Yes. Yes, they do. They'd hit the delegate button and then a pop-up would come in and they would put in like the domain and the username that they want to delegate to. And then that email would get routed to that person. And then they would get the hyperlink. They click on it to approve or reject. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So a user who's outside of GP goes into review and approval vendor, are they able to see the vendor on that website to see what they're approving?
Good question. So where do I put this? That's a good question. So they're going to see specific information that's set up in the template that you configure. It doesn't have too much information. So that's why we've asked to attach any documentation, like a letter of credit, or you could put in there, probably in the commentary, the website for the vendor. So that would flow across. So then the approver could click on that to check out the website. But out the box, it doesn't link to anything specific for the vendor.
And the second
Yeah.
question was, if a vendor was modified and the person who modified the vendor did not add a comment or sufficient comment, how can you see what they modified as an approval?
That's a great question. The simple answer that comes to mind is they won't. GP is not the best for audit trails. There's some third-party products that would work for that function, where one would sit inside of GP, one sits outside of GP, but you can connect it to SmartList. And if you had those tools, you could go in and look at a SmartList to say, okay, what changed on this vendor from what to what and by who and what date and time. But you would need that sort of audit module turned on for that. But good question, nonetheless.
Does it send a notification to resubmit the approval if modified?
It does, yeah. So if you change something and you try save it, it's going to say you need to recall it first. So then you have to hit the recall button or else it won't let you out of the window. And then you have to hit submit again. But yes, they should say, oh, I changed X to Y. So that way the approver knows. But if they don't put anything, then yeah, it's kind of hard to know. Yeah, good questions. Thank you. So again, there's the commentary box. So now as the originator, if I go back in, I could also just see now that this IP approval was completed at that date and time. And that holds true for any vendor. So if you come back 6 months later and want to see, hey, when was this approved? That little banner would stay there. So it's kind of nice, again, from an audit trail perspective. And then if you go into that workflow history, so as you saw, if I click the workflow, I had one to approve or reject, and then the other was to see the history. Again, this is really nice too, where you can come in and see, okay, it was submitted, approved, or submitted, approved by level 1, rejected by 2, went back to level 1, went back to level 2, and then approved by level 3. So kind of a nice consistent workflow in here. And again, if you had multiple approvers, right now it says assign user. If I clicked on that and click the blue button, that would take me to the list of people that were in there for approval. So seeing it from the email side, and I'll zoom in here, but this one just says you have a task from the vendor. Who is it going to? And then you've been assigned a task. Again, you can change the wording in that message setup. You can see when the deadline of the task is, who is it for? Those are your hyperlinks. And I'll show those in a section after this. The vendor, the company, the ID. So again, not a whole lot of information for the approval. So that's why I've said the best way is to have some attachments or commentary, at least on the vendor side. And it's more for that internal control purpose than really for anything else from what we've seen.
You attach a drill back to the vendor. If you have GP, it would open it.
It's a good question. I don't know, to be honest. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
In the email, there's a drill back.
Yeah, it might be this hyperlink. It might be the hyperlink like on the actual vendor ID now that you said it. Oh, here.
Edit.
Yeah, so that's true. Thank you.
Yeah, you have to write right company open and all that other kind of stuff.
Yes, that's right.
Like all drill backs. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. You are correct now. Yeah, that makes sense. And again, if the approver is not a GP licensed user and they don't have it open, then it wouldn't flow through. But all right, so purchase orders. So in here, what's nice too, and this holds true for vendors and accounts and all the other setups, is kind of playing in the navigation lists. So I'm not sure if a lot of people do that or not. I never used to, but now with Workflow, I kind of do it all the time. So you'd come in here, expand on purchase orders, go down to pending approval. So as a buyer, or as someone that's interested in what's happening with these things, I could see in this case, I've got 3 purchase orders. that are waiting outstanding, their pending action, when they were due, and then who the workflow user is that's approving it. So I'm like, hey, I need you to do this, rush. The other nice thing is if the approver comes into this window, again, if they have GP access, let me sort of zoom out here, they can go in and mark 1, 2, multiple POs and actually just approve it all at once. So they can kind of like, oh yeah, that's about right. That's right. Sure. Approve it. Or they can like drill into the document. And I don't show it here, but in this view too, right at the bottom of the screen, it would give you the list of details actually of that purchase order. And every time you clicked, it would refresh the PO below. So they don't have to open it. They could see the details sort of, yeah, right at the bottom of that screen. So that streamlines the process for sure. And then when we're in the email approval, so I'll zoom in here as well. So similar to the vendor, you've assigned a task. There's the attachment that would come in. So whether that's an Excel, a PDF, a JPEG, a Word document, whatever, that would flow through into the attachment. Telling them I've got an approval for a purchase order, their deadline, approve or reject. So we remove the delegate in this function. The company, the type, PO number, vendor, and the subtotal. And then down here, we've added in the lines. So that way they kind of see what's happening. Yeah, so I'll show you. So if we were to go back to too far, is it in here? So there's actually a drop-down list that says line comments, I think it's called. I don't have it in here, but it's in this drop-down where you would then say line comments, and then it puts in the table. And then what you would do is click on this one here, document lines. So again, it wouldn't work for a vendor because there would be no lines at the table, but for the purchase order, you go into there, and then essentially you can insert from a left to right table that says, oh, I want the, item ID. Yes. I want this. Yes. I want this. Yes. And you can sort of build out what that table looks like. Yeah. So it's really helpful for sure. Yes.
If the customer wants to make a change, like, oh, I don't want you to order 300, be actually 600.
Yeah.
And the approver just make the change already in the PO and then switch it approved, or does it have to get kicked back to them?
It would get kicked back to the person. Yeah.
But they can make a note that says change this.
Correct. Yes. Yes, that's what we would ask them to do, is in the reject button, put in the comments. Once they put in the comment, it goes back to the originator with the rejection comment, and then they go make the change, resubmit, and then it shows across. Okay, where did you go? Here we go. But no, good questions. Thank you. Okay, so we got through here. Let's zoom back in. Yeah, so in this case, we have the line numbers. If it's non-inventoried, yes or no. What the description or the item was, the number, description. It's nice. It ties into Wensoft, formerly Key to Act, formerly Wensoft, job costing. We didn't put the cost code in, but I just needed to know the job it was assigned to. We put in the account number, descriptions, dates, quantities, unit costs, and extended. So it gives the vendor or gives the approver some good insight. And then down here are all those comments. So whatever you put in the box will come back in here. So either it's blank or it'll have whatever, please see attached, attaches the expense form, incorrect entry, please update. So some basic stuff there. Okay, so then in here, the workflow approver email. So yeah, so if I were to click on the hyperlink now, this is what's going to launch. And the first time you launch it, depending on how your systems are configured, it might prompt you to sign in with your username and password. Some browsers you can save that so it automatically remembers it. Other times you have to manually put it in. And then you can come and put the comment and hit the approve button. And yeah, so then once it's done, it'll tell you that it's been approved. We've had lots of questions. It's going to move forward due to time. We've got about 10-15 minutes left or so. So some tips and tricks and additional functionality. So in here, the first question I get asked a lot, can you approve it on the phone? So yes and no. It comes down to security and a risk tolerance. So oftentimes the operations at site will say, yes, I need it on my phone, but then IT or someone else is going to say no, and for specific reasons. So first comes down to, if you want to approve it on the phone, a VPN on your phone. Sometimes it's just a little toggle in the settings that once it's active, now you're secured onto the network, then you can approve it. And I guess I should have mentioned earlier, I forgot, so apologies, but in order for that email in order for the web services to kick off, to give you the dialog box in the web, you have to be connected to your network. So if you're in the office, it's usually not a problem. But if you're working from home or at the airport or traveling, if you're not connected directly to your network, it's just going to say path not found type of thing, can't connect. So you'd make sure you're on a VPN, then you could try it again and then it would work. Alternatively, some customers use terminal services or remote desktop. Again, you might need to be on the VPN to get to the terminal server or the desktop, so it's a bit of a moot point. But other times they have IP whitelists or other ways to secure it. So once you're on the terminal server, if you have access to Outlook or to the web browser, you can log into your Office 365 account if you're configured that way, then you can trigger it from there. So in this case, doing it on the phone, you still need to be on the network so it can find that path. And if you don't have a VPN, then you can open up a port. But that's the tricky part, right? That's the risk that's now open to the World Wide Web. Anybody can intercept that packet, and whatever's in there, they can see and do with whatever. So at the end of the day, it comes down to that risk tolerance and what you would allow. For these guys, you know, they're at a mine site in the middle of nowhere. So they said, yeah, turn it on because there's no one out here hacking my stuff. It was more of like when people are traveling through larger cities that they wanted to make it a bit more secure. And I think too, you can set up an SSL certificate to kind of make it a little bit more secure. Regardless of how you want to connect, you actually have to use the MS Outlook app on the phone. So if you have an iPhone and you're using just the Mail app, it actually strips out some things, so it won't work. And I'm like, well, it works for me and it doesn't work for me. And we had this ongoing battle for like 2 days. And then we found out the person that it worked for was actually using the Office Outlook app versus just the Mail app on the phone. Okay, so that's that. So workflow delegation, honestly, I haven't used it too much. I think one client tried to use it. But if you know that you're going on vacation or you're going to be out of the office for a couple of weeks, A, you can set up a delegate, or B, if the administrator knows that you're going to be away, they can just change it in the workflow setup on who the alternate would be and then bring you back. But if you wanted to do it yourself, on the homepage under user preferences. So when you go into user preferences, then you can come down to this workflow delegation button. And then in here, you can assign delegates for certain people. And then say for Laura, she's going to be away. And these are sort of the start and end dates of that time. So then after that, the system would revert back to that person. Again, we didn't end up using this function. It was just easier for IT to manage the workflow approver and just add in the alternate. And then when they came back to switch it back, because end users didn't want to kind of fumble through this and figure it out. But
the way we handle it is they call the system administrator, then I end up doing the delegation.
okay, there you go. Yeah, perfect. So that would work because that's where you can delegate for, and then you pick the delegate and all that stuff. That's right. Yes. So it's good. It's a good option for sure. The other one I mentioned was the copy function. So this has been pretty good because like when I was building some of these workflows, it could take me 40-45 minutes to build one. And then if you had something out of sync, you can't move up and down. So delete, start again. So then I could kind of go back. So yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, I don't know why they can't fix that. I mean, to me, that's logical. Maybe it's a support or a request to Microsoft. But yeah, using the copy feature really helped us out where we can copy and then make edits accordingly. In this case, this company has a development environment separate from their production environment. So our next one that we did was, I guess I'll go through the copy. So yeah, you click copy, rename it. You can copy it to the test company. In this case, I probably should have shown it where we're in the test company copying it to production. But yeah, set it up in test, run it through the matrix. If everything works and you get sign off, then you can copy this across to the production, activate it, and off you go versus having to rebuild it from scratch. So pretty powerful tool there. And then there's the export workflow. So in here, you would click on to the specific workflow version that you want, click export. And then in here, you could send it to a particular file location. It uses a JSON file extension, which is a commonly known term, I guess. Saves the document or saves the workflow. Then you can go into another environment or take it to another customer. If you're building it, that's a pretty complicated one. As long as the rules match, kind of could work. So yeah, we moved this one from production environment to their test environment when we're doing some testing. So export it out. Then you just go back to the top level again, click export, import, hit import, browse for the particular file, and it pulls it in. The other one I want to show here in a few more minutes we have, so organizational structures. So we use this for them at the site as well. Has anybody used organizational structures or know what it is? Couple. Yeah, so this is a pretty good sort of security filtering tool. So you can build your organizational structure. In this case, we have site or corporate. So that's a department 10 or a department 20 or site 10 or 20. So it's pretty easy to filter out. And then down here, we had the main account as the second level. So what we ended up doing is those 20 self-service users, when they would go into the system, we would set their security permissions through organizational structures, which you can do on the user or the user class. Okay, so I like it at the user class because I can assign all these rec users to the class and they're filtered automatically. Long story short, when they go in and do a lookup on a GL account, they're only going to see the accounts they have access to versus the whole list. And if you think of it, works similarly to when you're setting up a vendor and you go into the accounts and then you go to the purchase detail window, you can mark which accounts show up against the vendor. So by default, you would only see the 2 or 3 accounts you marked, or you have to like drop down, show all accounts. In this case, it predefines that drop down list for the users. So when they're creating requisitions, they would just get a filtered out list already. They don't have the option to see everything. So this kind of worked. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Merging multiple requisitions to one purchase order. Has anybody done this if you use requisitions?
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it's a neat tool. Yeah, so again, like we said, we have all these rec users all looking to buy stuff. Then at the end of the week or whatever time frame, the buyer would consolidate it all, saying, okay, well, these 3 recs all would go to the same vendor. So I'm just going to consolidate them into one purchase order. If you did it by PO, you don't want vendors getting 5 POs on 5 different on the same day for something. They could consolidate their purchasing, and that helps with shipping and logistics and a few other things. So you would go into the purchase lists. Again, these lists are very powerful and they're sort of very underutilized. But if you go into that requisitions list, I could mark my 3, and then I hit this purchase button. And then what that does is it brings up sort of this purchase order preview window. In this case, I think I had different shipping deliveries or ship to addresses. So, but we can see here, if I zoom in briefly, I've got those 2 recs on one line and then one on a new one. And then as I go through options, this was that window I wanted to talk about earlier. When you add in the modern authentication app ID, this is that pop-up that you might recognize or might get. In this case, I needed to, because what's going to happen is now that this PO gets created, so I got 2 purchase orders here. And in this case here, we could actually see that this originated from Rec 3 and Rec 2, all rolling under the same PO. But what's nice now is this purchase order follows the workflow as a submitted state. So now it's already submitted after it's been created, and that modern authentication sign-in is triggering it to go to the approver of this purchase order. So it's kind of a cool process to take us there. And the other nice thing here is, again, these little chains. If you've ever done POP to SOP or sales orders and connecting for purchase orders, right? You can click on the line, click the chain, and it tells you that commitment. So this PO is committed from this requisition, in case line Rec 3, and this one from Rec 2. And if this was committed from a sales order, just as FYI, then that would have showed the sales order number. So kind of a cool thing there.
For a sales order to a requisition?
No, it would have to go through a PO. Yeah, and then if you linked it through, you might see it attach both. I haven't tried that. Good question. Okay, as we're coming through the end here, the last one I'll talk about is the purchase order generator. Anybody use this function if you're managing inventory? Yeah. So this is really neat. A whole lot of setup behind the scenes, I'm not gonna lie. You need your mins, your maxes, your reorder points, a whole bunch of stuff from the vendors. But at the end of the day, once it's configured, it works really well, because at the end of every week, the buyer just tells me, what do I need to buy? Suggest. A little bit more than that, but you come in, I guess, you put in any filters or restrictions, and you can set things. The buyer ID, I should have noted in here, that drop down, if I said yes, would give me my inventory, mill, mine operations, and so on. So that knows to route for that when this gets automatically created. So it's really handy. You click the suggested one, and that's going to say, okay, all these items you should buy, and this is the quantity you should buy, and the unit cost. And then so what'll happen next is the purchase order generator report comes up. And then in here, I just picked 2 as an example there. So it's created purchase order 5251, 5252. And if I go to those, I can actually see in my list that they're now under the purchase order transactions pending approval. I could mark them, approve it, and off it goes straight to the buyer for approval, and then follows any of the other workflow conditions that we've set up. All right. Well, thank you so much. That takes us to the end of the presentation. I hope you got some tips and tricks and some insights with workflow. Thank you. And if you have any questions, my contact information is up on the screen here. You can find me on LinkedIn. Again, I think these presentations will be sent out 2 weeks following the event. Or find me on the Brella app. Happy to meet or chat. And I'll plug again, we're on the mentorship committee. So at lunch now and tomorrow, we're going to just try and have a table and connect with people. So if you're interested in being a mentor or a mentee within the Dynamics community, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Can you assign it to active directory groups instead of a specific person?
Maybe, because you go in and you got to do that search, and then you can put in like your domain / the name. And if there is a group, then it would come through. Yeah.
We use it.
Okay.
So if you have people coming and going.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah.
First thing you can assign it to the group.
Yes.
Okay.
I like that.
When you attach a file, does that block get copied at every step of the way? Or is it just one reference to the block? I just see database.
Yeah, no, of course. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Chris might.
What's that?
So with the doc attach, where it saves it as a blob in the database, so for each time that workflow goes through, does it create another copy of the blob? Yeah, I don't think it would, but because it might just
Never know.
reference the same place. You never know.
GPs.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, I missed the beginning.
No problem at all.
It's based on the time.
Yeah.
If I can't wait the 2 weeks, can I email you for the?
Yes, of
slides
course.
earlier?
Yes, you bet.
Sometimes they don't put them all up.
Okay, no, definitely. Take my
That was my-
contact
That's
and
why I always put them on my site.
I know.
yeah, and I'll have it on my website and
Okay.
I'll have it on YouTube and
I
upload
took
a
a picture
video.
of your thing.
Okay.
My other question was, when the approver approves, does an email go back to the person or some kind of alert notification, something to the person who created the PO? So they know they now have to print it and send it to the vendor.
Yes, 100%. And there's
That's
options.
an option, right?
Yeah, so those are options.
That's good.
So in here, if it,
Here we are.
It's the SQL people around.
yes, let me. Oh, because I was probably sharing something different there. But yes, there's a setting in here.
So I just need to find the setting. I
Yeah,
just need
it's
to know-
a.
I need
no-
to know it exists so that I will look for it.
I don't know why it all of a sudden disappeared on here. Maybe I got cut, but like over here. Yeah, so when you're in the step
Yep,
setup, set
yep.
notifications for completed
Oh,
perfect.
perfect.
So when you click on that,
Yeah.
know where I am in here. Some things don't always want to work.
I think
No,
it'd do this.
I'm gonna have to set it up or tell them, do this specific thing, right?
Yes, no, there's a spot. There it is. So
Okay,
you can say on submission or on, the typical ones we have is on reject and final approve
okay,
or edit. So that way, if it's rejected, they're gonna get an email saying, and then the comments box should say why it's rejected.
Yep.
If it's final approved, then you know, hey, okay, now I can go do something with
got it.
Yeah,
Got
for
it.
sure.
There's no difference between approved and final approved.
There is. So the approved is if there's 3 people that have to approve it,
Yeah.
you're gonna get a notification that level 1 approved, level 2 approved.
Final is whoever the last person is, and if there's only one person, they are by default the last person. in.
Correct. Yes.
Get those final approvals.
Oh, you get the, there you go.
Is
Yeah,
there Econet notes for those?
Yellow notes?
I don't know.
No.
eConnect, so if you're trying to build off something else.
Yeah. No.
No, because the last time Econet was updated would have been like 2013 or
Right.
before. But if you had like Smart Connect, you could maybe do something,
Right, yeah,
you know, and hide using the node or build a node.
right.
you know,
I've never done that.
I have a quick question. for
Yes.
you.